Probably a song that is way, way, way too happy and jovial for the subject matter at hand. What is up, everybody? This is Jay, aka MultimediaJay. Good. The coast is clear. Yeah, coming back on here for a second stream. That's going to be a hybrid stream, and it is forward dated to tomorrow because I don't really plan on streaming tomorrow. I plan on just continuing through with the computer projects and making progress on Project EVTO. So part of what I had to figure out when I was clearing up all the stuff from earlier was this whole situation with COVID and the Pandemi-Rants. I said I didn't want to do another one of these things, but if another variant of concern started making the rounds, then I would. And, well, that variant of concern has surfaced, and it is BA2. It's already flagged as a variant of concern because it's a cousin of Omicron, but I've recently been following the data. Wastewater data suggests that New England is going to have a BA2 problem in a couple of weeks, and among the variant proportions from genomic sequencing, BA2 is now the dominant variant in New England, not so much in the rest of the country, where there might still be some Omicron going around. And of course, we know the worldwide situation is what it is, with the United States and Canada being in eclipse pandemic-wise, but there's still being problems with Omicron, the stealth variant, and BA2 in other parts of the world, such as the EU and lots of parts of Asia, at least among countries where the government isn't doctoring the data to make it look better than it actually is, which we can have some suspicion for some of the countries on the New York Times' maps. So hybrid stream, very monologue focused. If anyone shows up in chat, I might skip chat and catch up to chat at the end of the discussion. But a little bit of recap before we begin, a little IOU from my 40th birthday. Prunes, the Walmart, finally had some prunes back in stock. So, I didn't do this in my turning 40 video, but let's do it now. Continuing the tradition from when I turned 30 and I cracked the old man eat your prunes joke. Let's have two of them. One, two. And they still taste like slimy raisins. I have no idea why these are associated with old people, other than fiber. I don't know why it's such a meme, but that is probably going to be the most jovial part of this discussion. So now we're up to neither the opening music nor the prunes joke making any sense or fitting with the subject matter of a freaking worldwide pandemic being caused by a virus that can really mess with you and destroy chunks of your life. So I also gave the lava lamp a little time to cool off, which you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to run those for more than 8 hours at a time. So it looks like somewhere between someone taking a dump with neon green whatever and a mushroom cloud. I don't know. Who cares? We're getting demonetized no matter what because of the subject matter. But at least the fiber light fired back up. All right. This is probably the most we're going to be laughing in all of this because we have a lot of nerdy numbers to go over and to talk about where we're at on this. So why don't we begin with something really basic when it comes to the state of the pandemic with these Jay's Pandemi-Rants. When Omicron ended and the pandemic started going into, well, not ended, but Omicron went into free fall in the United States as it basically ran out of people to infect as it tore across the country in December and January. When Omicron went into free fall and the wave ended, I should say, I was like, I'm going to enjoy the break, when we can take our masks off and stuff. I'm going to try and, get things going again and whatnot. The government was talking about going from pandemic to endemic and all that stuff Dr. Fauci talks about and stuff. And if there's another variant of concern, I'm going to keep an eye on it and know when to start ramping things back up, like the masks. And tonight was the first night I've been wearing masks again. The variant isn't in my part of Connecticut yet, but it is in Connecticut, and it is ticking numbers upward again. And the drop in numbers that we saw at the beginning of last February is done. And what I can say is, with what's lurking still out there for COVID, it makes no sense that Washington is trying to act like, anyone in Washington is trying to act like this thing is over. Because if you look at the hard numbers tell you, no, it's not, even from the CDC's own data, which, by the way, thank goodness they kept their community transmission thing active instead of rendering it obsolete in favor of this new setup that they have. Before we look at any numbers, let me talk about the new CDC way of measuring COVID activity in a community. The new setup they have, keep the drinks handy because we've already done a lot of talking tonight. The new setup kind of takes into account that it's not 2020 anymore. It is, folks, reality check. It's 2022. We're not sitting ducks to COVID anymore. We have a robust vaccine and a booster regimen that we're working on the numbers for. If you're not like a immunocompromised or vulnerable or extra vulnerable to this thing, and you weren't like an emergency worker or something, you've gotten to watch the numbers get fleshed out instead of being essentially in the group that's finding out when we should schedule the next booster, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. As I speak today, March 26th, going into the 27th, which is the date of the stream, the FDA is working on authorizing, maybe not necessarily saying everybody needs to get it, but the FDA is working on authorizing a second booster for vulnerable individuals over 50. Now, whether I think I'm vulnerable or not, when that recommendation goes down to people over 40, I'm going to go get one just to stay current. I didn't be diligent and vigilant in staying current on shots or putting up with all the rough and tumble nature of Moderna 3 times so far to screw it up because things get quiet for a bit. Sometimes in the middle of a storm, that quiet that you think is sunshine turns out to be the eye of a hurricane. Of course, I'm not one of those people that thinks that we're going to see another Delta-style wave in this country. Not yet, anyways. There's nothing in the data that would suggest that. And even now, I mean, in Connecticut's, again, not getting enough credit, Connecticut is doing better than a lot of New England is. We have high vaccination, high even coverage, and it's showing on the COVID Act Now maps. But back to the topic before you start looking at numbers, maps, and data. So the CDC has revised the way they measure COVID activity to bring all of that into 2022. There's a lot of infection immunity and vaccine immunity floating around. There's boosters available, and we have therapeutics now. We have pills to treat this thing. We have more options of treating this than we did 2 years ago. I know it's easy to forget exactly how much has happened in the last 2 years with everything that's been going on with the pandemic since 2020 when this darn thing arrived on our shores. But it's important to realize the world in 2020 was a very different place. So this, what we call COVID now, COVID, so-and-so got COVID. There's COVID. There's COVID in that state. Darn prunes. Actually, I had something to eat before I did this. So yeah, I'm breaking my own rules when it comes to not doing these stupid things after you eat. Years and years and years, and I still can't get this right. Whatever. So here's the thing with, so it's not 2020 anymore. In 2020, the name of this thing, we call it COVID now, rather generic. In 2020, this thing was called the novel coronavirus, or coronavirus for short, because there was only one of them, the ancestral strain, and it was new. Novel means new. It was a new virus. We didn't know how much it was going to rip through the population, what it was going to do to people, and we found that out, obviously. To the chagrin of conspiracy wackos that are like, look, the science keeps changing. Yeah, the science is evolving because we've been flying at the seat of our pants because this is a new virus. There have been previous coronaviruses, but the 19th one, or whatever the heck this, whatever we're up to in terms of this, or whether it was named after 2019 or what have you. I think it was named after 2019 when it first surfaced in China. But the whole thing with this has been, we didn't know what to do about it yet. Now we do. There's been plenty of time to practice on treating patients, dealing with hospitals, getting lots of patients at once, things along those lines. And most importantly, the country is majority vaccinated with at least one dose. States like Connecticut, 95% at least one dose. There are very few unvaccinated, true blue unvaccinated people left in certain parts of the country. And as Michael Smerconish mentioned in one of his very notable opinion segments on CNN, which I actually retweeted on Twitter, and I've actually responded to a couple of times in previous discussions like this. In order for us to move forward with the pandemic and not be sacrificing the economy on the altar of we can't do anything but lockdowns, we need to know how to deal with this thing, and we need to know how to deal with it as an endemic disease. Simple enough. We need to know, in order to move forward, We need to stop punishing the vaccinated. Stop punishing the people that did everything right. Let me take a look at Connecticut before putting it on the screen here just to verify this. At least one dose. We are at 94.5% at least one dose. Only 5% of Connecticut's residents have completely snubbed the vaccine at this point. 5% left. Now, if those people are never going to get it and they're just going to wing it with infection immunity, we can't shut down the state because of those 5%. Full stop. In 2020, we were sitting ducks to this thing. Now we're not. We've dealt with it before. We have stuff to treat it with, and we have stuff to prevent it. We also have stuff to prevent it from getting serious. You know, there's a level of effectiveness versus symptomatic infection, and there's a level of effectiveness versus more extreme outcomes. This has been a thing for a while now, much to the dismay of people on the internet who will try and screech and holler at you like it's still mid-2020 and there's nothing we can do about it, or early 2021 and the vaccine's still a new thing. None of those are true. It is early 2022, heading towards the end of the first quarter of 2022, if you consider calendar quarters, January, February, March. It's time that the way we do things reflect all of that. But there is one very important caveat to that, though. If you've been paying attention to people talking about this in like political speeches or the CDC or what have you, you'll have seen this divide forming in the way people talk about handling COVID. There has been a difference that started out as something you'd notice and has started to grow a little. And that is the difference between what you should do as an individual to take care of yourself and what the government is going to do to keep the hospitals from being overloaded. And I think this new way of measuring COVID activity in a community from the CDC is exactly that. Because hospital data is now part of them measuring and giving guidance on how much COVID is ripping up your community, blah, blah, blah. Because hospital data is in there, fundamentally, we have a 1 = 1 problem, as I would call it. And this is drawing on my background in data science and analytics now. There's a little something I like to call 1 = 1. If you want to be able to reliably measure something, you need to have a consistent unit of measurement that doesn't have other factors factored into it. Your 1 of something needs to always be 1 of something. I've dealt with this with the warehouse folks where they didn't clean up their math enough and they couldn't plan labor because of it. And if you've taken a weights and measures class in your school years, you probably know about some outdated ways of measuring things that are a wonderful example of this problem. Here's a great example: cubits. It's even in the Bible, for Pete's sake. You read the Old Testament about Noah built the ark X cubits wide. What's a cubit? A cubit is an outdated ancient unit of measurement that goes from your elbow to your middle finger. So it's basically the length of your forearm. So here to here. There's also stuff like handspans, where you open your hand up all the way and it's the distance from your thumb to your pinky. This is a handspan. What's the problem with measuring things in cubits and handspans? Easy. People have different size arms and hands. I can measure something that's 5 cubits long. Maybe you have longer arms than me, and you measure something that's only 4 cubits. So it's not like with an inch or a centimeter or a mile or a kilometer. It's not where it's always the same. It's not 1 does not equal 1. There's variability in even one of the same units. A cubit is not always a cubit. A handspan is not always a handspan because it depends on the size of your arms and hands. So how does this factor over to the new way the CDC is reporting activity in a community? Hospitals don't sit on their ass when they're getting a lot of patients that have the same thing wrong with them. They try and expand their capacity. If you're taking the government's approach and you're saying that COVID policy needs to be based on not keeping the hospitals from overloading, if the hospitals go into surge capacity or change what's where in order to try and accommodate more patients, now you have a situation where more needs to happen before you will officially say that your community has a COVID problem, as opposed to community transmission, which would talk about cases. You know, how much is the thing whipping around your community? irrespective of what's happening in the local healthcare system. So the bottom line is there's too much variability versus I want to know quite simply, how much is COVID whipping around my neighborhood? This new measurement is not going to help me. It's going to give me, and in the worst cases, it's going to give me a false sense of security. I'll still use it because things like masking requirements and whatnot where I'm at for work depend on whether it's low, medium, or high, but I'm going to take it with a grain of salt because I know there's hospital stuff in there, and hospitals are not always consistent in terms of how much capacity they have. We've seen hospitals get pummeled in New York and other parts of the country trying to treat more patients than they had capacity for. And also, don't forget, we're talking hospital capacity in general, not necessarily ICU capacity, which is something I think of more when I think of COVID hospitalization data. Let's bounce on over to browser mode here and relink the web browser. It looks like I confused it again. Right then, let's take it on down. Did I open another? Yeah, I opened and closed some windows, so it doesn't know which one to link to. So let me just start at New York Times arguing with me again, or advertising to me again. Let's start with the New York Times hotspot map. Oh, now it picked it up. It's because I had the window. It's because I had the window. I had the window minimized. That's why. Oh, good. It picked it back up. Yay. Okay, give me my pointer back and give me my live control room. Let me see this here, and let's talk about these new numbers. But let's begin at what the business folks would call, let's begin the discussion at a high level and then drill down. Hey, cool, I can get the New York Times for $1 a week. Woo! I'm guessing it's an app these days, and I wouldn't be getting like a newspaper to my house. All right. So here is fundamentally the state of things. Remember, though, that some countries may not be as good at reporting data. They may not have the resources, or the government might be messing with the numbers to make things look better than they actually are. But assuming you can trust the folks who are willing to say that are actually willing to say there's a problem in my country, the hotspot map shows the United States clearly in eclipse. Canada, a little worse than us. Brazil has some stuff going on, but then there's problems in Europe, parts of Asia, Southeast Asia in particular, especially Vietnam, and South Korea. I don't know what happened there. They're like, whatever, man. Australia also has problems too. So fundamentally, the idea of, COVID is not over. I named this hashtag, spelled it out just to try and be clever, but there's a popular hashtag going around Twitter about, hey, don't go sounding the all clear just yet. We still got to be careful, especially if things tick up in our area. So it's important to realize that the World Health Organization wasn't pulling punches when they said that we can't let COVID vaccinations become the sort of thing that only rich countries have, and they hoard all the vaccine supply for themselves. The United States has a lot of Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, which technically Pfizer and Janssen, are European countries. So this can't be a U.S., Europe, some parts of Asia thing. Of course, China makes their own as well with Sinovac. And Gavi.org, the Global Vaccine Alliance, has actually listings of which companies worldwide have which COVID vaccines in development at what stages. Don't know how up to date it is, but let's just say that Western countries weren't the only ones trying to make vaccines. There's countries in India, countries in Russia, countries in South America. South Korea has a local manufacturer as well. They're not, I think they're importing a lot of our stuff, but they do have local companies working on their own. So Russia, by the way, has the Sputnik vaccine, which is viral vector similar to J&J, and was tested against the original strain and was shown to be quite effective against symptomatic illness. So that's good stuff. So, everybody, who wants to do something about this, instead of, let this thing do whatever, everybody who wants to do something about this thing has contributed quite well to the wonderful tools we have nowadays to deal with this thing that we didn't have 2 years ago. And I think that's great. It's an accomplishment. And in the case of Moderna, specifically, U.S.-based company, triumph of American, American, capitalism, companies, whatever you want to call it. Bottom line is our market economy has produced a wonderful solution that's right from New England. Although I could be biased being a New Englander myself. Now, this is also what I use, of course, I mentioned this before, for IRL streamers. You know, are they modeling responsible behavior? Do they don't want to go to a part of the world that's worse, etc.? But the big thing to look at here is when people act in the United States like everything's over, it's because they're biased because everything's in eclipse here in North America. But that's if you look at the country as a whole. One of the things that I've been seeing is that problems with COVID in its current state, no giant wave going on, etc., are hidden in the data versus, you know, when it's big like this. So there's problems in the United States. They're not showing up here because as a whole, the country's doing okay. But if you carve up the U.S. by states and especially by counties, you can see where there's still activity going on. Let's do that. Here's the United States. A lot less red on COVID Act now than we saw last time. Nice. Until you switch over to county view. Bam. There's the parts of the country that still have problems with Omicron. But it's mostly problems with Omicron. BA2 is the relative newcomer here. Looks like the state of Florida is no longer submitting county data. Shouldn't be surprised with Ron DeSantis and his Surgeon General. But there are clearly parts of the country that still have an Omicron problem going on. It started out in the Northeast, much like it started out in the Northeast because the Omicron came into the U.S. from Eastern Canada after it surfaced in that area. But now, of course, if we look at the variants and whatnot, it's actually BA2's taking over here. But it's important to realize whenever you're dealing with numbers, you always want to know what goes into them. So that's the key difference here. We can see, of course, there's a problem with BA2 in the stealth variant in New York City, and it's creeping up I-95 into Connecticut from the west. Rhode Island, I think a lot of the problem with Rhode Island is it's a small state. There's a lot more mingling in state activities than many other states that are larger. Well, every other state is larger than Rhode Island. And look at Hawaii. Big island here is red, while there's less trouble on the other islands. Then there's Alaska. Don't really know what to do about that. It looks like a painting of a sunrise. But, look at, Connecticut and look at Connecticut. But again, go back to the state level for overall how things are going. Here's another wonderful example of Connecticut doing better than other New England states. And what we have to thank for that, vaccination. Connecticut, vaccination by county. Some of the most even coverage vaccine-wise within a state in the country. Massachusetts has some as well, etc. It's not like, say, out here in Nebraska or Texas. Even New York has a bit more variation in the colors of blue on here. Michigan, even California has some of this going on. Nevada and stuff along those lines. But 77% of the U.S. population, 1+ dose. And, of course, there's data on COVID Act now for upticks and stuff like that. So risk levels, there's also vaccination data. Let's just load that. Let's just scroll to that off screen and come back to that. I guess past all the major cities, which state is the worst. Oh, no. It's only at the state level. So let's go straight to Connecticut just to show what's been going on over here. So Connecticut, here is the biggie. We have activity in the southwestern corner of the state. But what really matters, and then around the state capital in Hartford, what matters is this infection rate. The infection rate is, for every person that gets this thing, how many other people are they infecting? And it's an average. So to go above 1 means the virus is gaining ground ever so slowly. But at its worst, in the original outbreak, before we locked everything down, it approached 2 here in Connecticut. So 1.0, excuse me. Too many thoughts at once, man. Too many thoughts at once. When we last talked at the beginning of February, there was a lot more red. Well, that's blue. There was a lot more red on the national map. Now it's a bunch of gold and orange, and we can see where the problems are if we switch over to county view, and we can see the parts of the country that still have problems. That's largely with Omicron's fall, not the arrival of BA2 and the stealth variant picking up steam. So in Connecticut, when last we talked about this, Omicron was in total free fall with an infection rate down around 0.5, meaning that COVID was losing very serious ground in this state. Now it's back above 1. We can split it out by infection rate. Highest infection rate, Fairfield County down by New York City. Hartford County, the state capital, second highest infection rate, followed by New Haven County. And where's Middlesex County? Oh, 0.91. Okay. But the bottom line is we're seeing more stuff. We're seeing more numbers that are up around 8, 0.8, 0.9, and 1 than 0.5, 0.6, and 0.7. Here's vaccination uptake. We notice again the freak out effect. When there's waves going on, the demand goes up. Delta, Omicron around here. But then when, oh, look, the coast is clear, everything drops off. So here and the FDA is approving a second booster for people over 50, supposedly, very, very shortly with that kind of stuff. But let's look at the cases for Connecticut and the infection rate. So here's where we were. Down in early February, we dipped down to 0.59, but things have gradually been picking back up, especially as mask requirements and other stuff in various areas have been relaxed, and particularly since that new map came out and whatnot, where it incorporates hospitalization data, because fundamentally there's a difference between what's good for you as an individual and what's good for politicians trying to get reelected who don't want the hospitals to get overrun. Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, we can keep the hospitals from getting overloaded, but if you're that patient that has trouble breathing for 6 months afterwards because you get long COVID and it impacts your ability to work, your ability to, your ability to do stuff, this, that, or the other, if you're the person with long COVID, well, that sucks to be you then. And if you're the person with the medical bills, that sucks to be you. There's a fundamental difference, and this has been a thing in politician speech after politician speech after politician speech, between what's good for you individually and what's good for not overloading the healthcare system. And I've been seeing this in the Connecticut governor's speeches for over a year now. So even though there's new metrics that determine things like, should your employer require you to wear a mask, it's important to realize what goes into those numbers and make sure that you keep your head on straight. Choose your friends wisely, choose where you're going to hang out wisely, and, be vigilant, because this thing is not over. Cases per 100K in the state of Connecticut. Here's the Omicron spike. Here's where it went absolutely crazy with the increased transmissibility of Omicron. BA2, similar to Omicron, maybe it won't reinfect as much. We're waiting on data from that. More transmissible than its senior cousin. So we might see another spike depending on where things go, and especially since it's been several months since the Omicron wave, if there's waning immunity from prior infection and if people aren't current on their shots. But look at where we leveled off at the bottom of the bowl after the Omicron spike. 8 or 9 in terms of cases per 100K for the state of Connecticut. The last time we were this low was October. And in October, we still had mask requirements and all kinds of other stuff, not necessarily for the state, but we obviously treated things very, very differently the last time we were at this level. The level off is done. It's not dropping anymore. We're back around where we were in the middle of last autumn when Delta was starting to make the rounds, followed by Omicron shortly afterwards. But now we have a more lackadaisical attitude because of the changes in the guidance. But where is the difference in the numbers? See what I mean? The difference in the numbers is because, there's hospital capacity available and more ways to treat this thing. But it doesn't change anything about this could really suck for you if you get it and you're behind on your shots or you haven't taken any shots. If you're among the 5% of citizens of Connecticut that are still 100% unvaccinated. And, you don't have any lingering immunity from a prior infection. So that's really the point I want to drive home the most, is that what's good for your local healthcare workers and not slamming them with bazillions of hours of overtime is not always the best thing for you individually in terms of your own vigilance and perseverance in this mess. So, matter of fact, 2001 into the summer, we got down 1 and 2 per 100K. So if anything, we should have had a blast that summer, and we kind of did. Because in late spring of 2021, the guidance came out. If you were vaccinated, you could take your mask off. And that is where I think the CDC made its biggest mistake last year. The CDC, they got the science right, but they seem to have forgotten the psychology of people that are unfortunately the lowest common denominator in our society. So if you think about somebody who is not very ethical about things, somebody who doesn't want to do the right thing, When you tell somebody that they can take their mask off if they're vaccinated, and you don't have the teeth of a vaccine passport or some other way of backing that up, and businesses can't do anything about you if you flaunt the rules and break them, what is stopping somebody from lying about their vaccination status in order to take their mask off? Of course, nowadays, only 5% of the population would still fit that category here in Connecticut. But what I think the problem is going to be, like I said last time, variant of concern starts another wave like BA2, and people don't want to go back. They don't want to put the masks back on. They're worried about the election results. So nobody wants to respond to this, and it just runs wild like it is in South Korea. New president just got elected. One of the first things that came out, we think the wave's going to peak, and then it's going to go back down. It isn't really doing too much for the hospitals. The line that the politicians toe: take care of the healthcare system. Don't overwhelm the hospitals, which is a noble goal in and of itself, because as we saw during the Delta and Omicron waves, when the hospitals are overloaded, it doesn't just affect the COVID patients, it affects literally everybody who needs anything else from the hospital. Surgeries, heart attack patients, things like that. Literally everybody else that benefits from hospital care is affected when the hospital's overloaded. Plus, if you have friends who work in healthcare, it makes them really, really hate their jobs and not want to stay in the profession. So how many times have I seen healthcare workers complain about being betrayed by so-and-so politician or whatever because of policy that drove lots more people into the hospital and made them work double-time shifts in the whole 9 yards because they had to take care of so many extra people. Couldn't take vacations, had to work themselves to the bone, and even then it still felt like they were fighting a losing battle as they watched patient after patient after patient be put on machines and die in the hospital over something that we know from the beginning of 2021 with the release of the vaccine became very, very preventable. But there's so much propaganda out there that is making people want to do stupid stuff that's not good for them. Unbelievable. Back to the maps, and let's take a close look. So this is Connecticut. Let's take a close look at the CDC data. Fortunately, when they switched over to this new map, community levels, they kept a link to the old map for community transmission. Keep in mind, how are community levels calculated? Let me see. Let me move a few things around here. Let me just load that up in another tab and spare you folks that's right. I can't even click it that way. Let me try shift clicking. Oh, it's a pop-up. Okay. Well, let's put their own metrics back on the screen here. Here's how it's calculated. So new cases per 100K depends on whether or not it's above or below 200 in the past 7 days, similar to what we had for community transmission. The modifiers also would include hospital admissions, percent of staffed inpatient beds in use in a 7-day average, new admission. Yeah, so hospitals, new admissions, and percent of beds in use. So the hospitals, like we said, the hospitals can modify the ability of this number to change via surge capacity and finding other ways to treat patients. It's not like it was before with community transmission, where you could see raw how much stuff was flying around how much of this crap was flying around in your neighborhood. Now that number is going to be subject to a modifier based on how good the hospitals are at treating X amount of patients. So this is the fundamental issue here. And so if you don't understand this very important detail, you might think most of the country is in the clear, even though if we go over to the variants later on, we'll find out BA2 is the new dominant variant in New England. And yeah, well, let's take a look at the old map. Here's community transmission, which there's a big disclaimer up here that says community transmission levels are provided for healthcare facility use only. Yeah, well, no. I want to know when this new hot variant, BA2, that's taking over New England, is starting to make its way into my area. When do the yellow count eastern orange, red, etc.? So, when it's going around, because I stay vaccinated and I stay current on my vaccinations and whatnot. I end up like, say, President Obama, former President Obama getting just a scratchy throat, or Hillary Clinton getting mild symptoms. These old boomer and Gen X politicians, I think they're all baby boomers though. All these old people politicians who just have blah symptoms and whatnot because they're caught up on their shots. Yeah, cool. But, what about lost wages from getting kicked out on overtime, or kicked out on quarantine? Kicked out on overtime. It's been a long day, man, and I'm a night person, so it's just getting started. Yeah, so what about the financial side of it? What about getting booted out of work? Can't, on quarantine, or maybe if it gets treated like a disability or a leave of absence, I lose a percentage of wages and whatnot. And it's like being on unemployment, like during EVTOs. Stuff like that. I mean, if I get COVID, even if I don't end up in the hospital, there will still be impacts. And then what about the risk of long COVID? What about that, etc.? Also, eligibility for the next booster is affected by a recent prior infection. Now that complicates things. It's just better not to get this thing than to roll the dice because you got it and hope you don't roll snake eyes. Oh, look at Florida. Some uptick in certain areas in the southwestern corner of it as well. So, I mean, it's not all sunshine and rainbows down there either. So there are some areas where this is going on. But yeah, the old map, no, I'm going to keep using it. Matter of fact, I've already switched back to wearing masks a little early, but I expect the rest of Connecticut to turn orange in the next couple of weeks. Why? Well, here's the variance. Dark purple, let's just go up here. Here's the... Reload. Come on, CDC, you can do it. Data as of March 19th, so it's a little dated, versus March 26th. So assume that whatever trends are represented here are actually more than what they are. So BA2 as of the 19th was the dominant variant in New England. It could very well be the dominant variant in the US by now. It's just, this hasn't gotten to the point where it's going to show that. Or maybe like in a week or two or so. But, all right. BA11, I believe that's Omicron. So, whoop, there it is right there. I think the one in the middle, there's BA2. I think 11529. Isn't that the stealth variant? It's kind of been sneaking around, kind of a hybrid of sorts. And, of course, this is the Delta variant right here. The orange is the Delta variant. We saw what happened with that. But that's for the country. Look at the pie charts for the pink and purple. Look at the pie charts for the pink and purple for all the regions. Here's region 1, New England. Click. Region 1, Omicron, is the pink. What's the purple? A little bit laggy. BA 11529 actually... Oh, all right. Well, let's check out... Oh, okay. So a little bit of... Hold on a second. Wait, what's... No. I'm reading it wrong. Purple is Omicron. Pink is BA2. 55.4%. It's just part of the Omicron family. So let's see. Well, you know what? We can just take this, switch off region. Oh, this is region 1. This wasn't even for the whole country. I'm guessing the country looks a little different. That's right. I have this bookmarked for New England. That's why. So here is the country as a whole. Here is the country as a whole. CDC, switch off to New England, region 1. There's BA2. There's BA2 taking over at 55.4% out of tests that were genomically sequenced and stuff. There we are. So Pink's the one to keep an eye on. New dominant variant in New England, of course, because Omicron already ripped through here and, has very much been collapsing ever since. So the big question is, if there's going to be an uptick in cases, when does it happen and how big is it? How big is it going to be compared to something like Delta or Omicron, especially if people have lingering immunity from being prior infection with Omicron if they're not current on their shots? That's the biggie here. And don't forget, fully vaccinated is still 2 doses, the original 2 doses. So there might be people that blew off the boosters that are now sitting ducks to these newer variants because in Connecticut, the vaccine became generally available outside of specific age groups in May. So April and by May, I should say, was the national goal. I think we were like April for it or something. Bottom line is we're heading towards when this whole vaccination thing was generally available for at least a year. And there's the last thing. This is the important one because it's literally crappy science. Wastewater. One of the things that we found out very early on in the pandemic was that people started crapping out the virus when they did their number 1s and 2s before they started showing symptoms. So there's this surveillance network of wastewater surveillance. And so anywhere that's red, let me see how easy this is to zoom in on. You see, how do we zoom in on this? Click it, and then can we do control scroll? Yeah, we can control scroll it to zoom it. All right, let's go look at the Northeast here. Come on, this buggy, slow thing here. I think it's Tableau anyways, but all right, so we can see here, percent change. There's a problem in Rhode Island, bit of a problem down on the coast here, and a problem out in the west. Where are the most cases happening right now? In Connecticut. Southwestern 3 countries. So, yeah, it's literally crappy science because people shed the virus when they use the bathroom before they start showing symptoms if they're recently infected. So, when you see these dots turn red, you can expect that area to have some kind of uptick at some point. The question is how much and when. So, this crappy wastewater data... I'm never going to stop with the poop jokes on this one. This data is why I made plans to start wearing masks again, and why I made the prediction that I made that parts of the state are going to start having these kinds of problems, because it shows up. And of course, Rhode Island struggling a lot like they've been throughout all of this. Also, there's nothing in eastern Massachusetts. So I don't know if these watersheds might bring in some water from around the Boston area, but to process or whatever it is. But bottom line is, when you start seeing stuff turn red on here, it's only, you should watch and see if there's a problem that pops up in the coming, days or weeks whenever this happens. But yeah, wastewater data suggests that there are parts of the country look at around Chicago. Look around Chicago and Illinois, up in Wisconsin and whatnot. West Coast has a few issues going on as well. How about we go check out California, actually? Real-time US data. Oh, there are some parts of California that have problems, and of course, some parts of California that are turning orange instead of gold. A couple of green counties too, mostly in rural areas and whatnot. This thing still, has problems transmitting between humans when there's less humans to transmit between. But yeah, wastewater data. This one is another one to keep an eye on to see when, the fun might be coming to an end soon, very shortly. So yeah. Basically, as we head into late spring, I'm expecting there to be rage and anger, especially if the governor toggles masks back on or something, or if there's some kind of something or not. But the emergency powers were sunsetted in February for the governor, so it would have to be something the legislature would have to agree on. But in terms of like employers and workplaces and stuff who follow CDC guidance, we could probably... Well, the thing is, by the time, under the new numbers, by the time things were flipping from green to yellow to red, it's going to be slower than if you just looked at when cases started popping up in your area. So if you wanted to be proactive instead of reactive and respond quickly to this mess, if you wanted to, be sure you're out in front of any potential issues and whatnot, you'd want to jump at the first warning signs that this was going to happen. Well, we have that wastewater data. So if there's more problems in a month or two, and somebody in DC, like maybe Dr. Walensky or something, is jumping on C-SPAN or whatever, like, we couldn't have seen this. Well, actually, we could have seen this coming. We have numerous data that'll give some early warning signs that stuff might happen. And then we just watch for stuff like this to catch up, or in this case, this, I'll be keeping an eye on it as it creeps through the states. Let me guess, wild prediction, New Haven County turns red at some point. Again, they've struggled numerous times throughout all of this. So, hashtag COVID isn't over. Now I'm going to go check out and see if there's been any more meetings. I know the White House went from weekly to either bi-weekly or monthly on YouTube. So I'm going to see what they're talking about here. But the bottom line is, yes, I mean, we aren't in 2020 anymore. We've made progress. We really shouldn't punish the entire country when the majority is vaccinated. But in terms of the other effects of getting infected, not wanting to have, for example, get kicked out of work or risk long COVID or something like that, you got to look at very different stuff compared to what numbers that local healthcare folks can use in terms of seeing if in terms of the hospitals and whatnot. It has to be based on you being vigilant and looking out for yourself, not necessarily whether or not the hospital can afford to absorb a new wave of infections. It's where we live in. And it's all part of data science. It's all part of the numbers and knowing what's in your numbers when you make decisions for what you're going to do for yourself. Now, I'm going to say the same thing that I said last time. I hope I don't have to make another one of these again, but again, no promises. I'd like to be done with these things. This is not something I want to be doing a lot of on my channel. But when major things take place, like, for example, Connecticut now being a part of the country where COVID's gaining ground again after weeks and weeks and weeks of Omicron being in free fall, can't be letting this stuff get out of date, should I? CDC.gov for more information about some of this data. COVIDactnow.org for the maps that I keep an eye on. CDC.gov also has the wastewater maps that can show some early warning signs if things flip in the other direction before they actually do, because of, unfortunately, the crappy way in which the virus starts becoming detectable in various sewer shed populations and stuff along those lines. And of course, who could forget vaccines.gov. Stay current on things. My plan is when the booster that's approved right now for 50 plus becomes 40 plus, I start looking for an appointment. I didn't stay vigilant with staying current on shots for this long to screw it up with BA2. That's not going to be the case. So, anyways, nothing in all of this, however, replaces good old-fashioned common sense and also choosing your friends wisely. And, where you go and what you do in terms of who you hang out with, even incidentally, like where you shop and when you shop. It's one of the reasons why I do grocery shopping close to closing late, not as late as I used to, because the Walmarts in my area aren't 24 hours, but definitely later than I otherwise would. One of the fun things about being on night shift, people. You get used to staying up late enough to do that stuff. Right, keep your head on straight, folks. I hope I don't have to do another one of these discussions. I got some tech projects to get back to. Till next time, this is MultimediaJay signing off. Thanks for stopping by. Yar.